All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports. I'm joined by the CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitroff. We're here to recap Week 14 in the only way that we know how to do it here at Sumer. Thomas, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited. We have an on-site with our internal scouting staff, which we can talk about a little bit later. But to be around all the scouting people who have a lot of interest in data, watching you, Eric Eager, in there interacting with guys like Mike Mayock and John Idzik, to me, I think it's great to watch you interact with our scouting group because they have a great deal of respect for you and your intelligence, and you also understand football. That's always a good mix for football people, right? They want to know the data people have some interest in football at some level and experience.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of fun, and it's always cool to, I've gotten the pleasure of being able to pick your brain for a few years now, and it adds so much to the, it adds so much. I mean, not to peek underneath the hood at all, but like the fact of the matter is like any problems we have with the data are almost always not data problems, they're football problems, right? And so if you go and, make sure that the football is sound, the solutions will, generally speaking, to your data problems will go away. And so I think we'll be even more turbocharged in that now that we have so many people who know football at such a deep level. Inferno 214, by the way, how hot do you think Veach's seat is right now? It's not hot, but we will be talking Kansas City. I can't believe that we have to talk about how hot Brett Veach's seat is just like 10 months after he won his second Super Bowl as the Chiefs GM. But I can understand the frustration for Chiefs fans. We will certainly talk about that. But yeah, we will talk Chiefs versus Buffalo because that game was super compelling. But this would not be a Sumer Sports Show Monday show if we did not talk about our hometown Falcons here. They lose 29-25. Where do we want to start? Do we want to start where where Baker Mayfield, got you in the doubting phase for the first 3.5 quarters of the game? Then he comes up big with a couple nice corner routes, one to Chris Godwin and then one to Cade Otton for the game-winning touchdown.
Look, it was just a good game, Eric. I mean, in the end, it was a back and forth game. There's no right or wrong, no cheering on one side or another. I don't want the Atlanta fans thinking I'm cheering against. What I want to see is good football. I want to see good decision making. I want to see good team building, because in order for Arthur Blank to ever win his Super Bowl, which he deserves to win for himself and the city, things have to be falling into place, right? You need to make sure that you're really strategic about you're putting it together. So it's really interesting to watch this division, right? We talked about it. So it's a good lead in on it, right? This division right now, I mean, now they go from leading number one in the division, right, to second, like that, which I didn't know that was actually going to happen. I didn't know.
Yeah, we had the Falcons with over a 60% chance to win the division going into the week. And now this is a little bit different than the market, right? The betting markets have, if you look at my account, the betting markets have the Bucks as a slight favorite at plus 175. The Falcons are in that 180 range, and then the Saints are right behind them at about 185, 190. Our numbers at Sumer Sports actually are a little higher on the New Orleans Saints. So I think some people who've seen me tweet about Derek Carr are maybe a little bit surprised there, but we actually have Tampa Bay at 39%, New Orleans at 32%, and Atlanta at 28%. And a lot of that is just schedule driven, right? The schedule is much easier, I think, for the Saints than it is for the other two teams. So even though they haven't been necessarily as impressive, in fact, I think you can make the case that this is maybe one of the more underachieving teams all year. We are more bullish on the Saints than some people are moving forward. But yeah, vis-a-vis these two teams, right? I think the Bucks, defensively were pretty good yesterday. I think the Falcons have a decent opportunity at times to deploy some really explosive weapons. And for the most part, they held the Bijan Robinsons and the Kyle Pittses in check. They gave up 172 yards to Drake London, and that was a pretty good game by him. But for the most part, they did their part. And I think if you're the Falcons, I think that you're going to want to have some of those big plays, to the final drive and things like that. You're going to want to have those back. And if you're Desmond Ridder, you're going to want to have that interception inside the 10-yard line back.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to want to have the sack for a safety back. That was an important time. To your point, Drake London, man, he was standing out yesterday. It was fun to watch him. I'm still trying to get my head around where Pitts is in all of this, right? I mean, we all love a running back. I think he had left less than 45 yards, I think, yesterday. Teams are really focused on that. You know what we're saying. I guess what I'm saying there is there's two teams that are battling like crazy. Tampa's trying to figure out the quarterback situation. I called you. We won't get into the details on it. But when I called you and I mentioned that I would fire you if you were recommending, a quarterback as such, you just were kind of quiet for about a minute. And I was thinking, I hope I didn't offend you. I was always
no. I think I knew you were joking, but it's funny because, and we've had this discussion before, right? We talked about Jordan Love last week. By the way, if you go to sumersports.com, we have an article up about what it's going to look like for the Packers if they want to extend Jordan Love. He has another opportunity tonight against the New York Giants on the road to kind of continue to make his case to be the Packers starter moving forward. But the number of quarterbacks in the NFL that are of starter caliber is just not very high anymore, right? And so when you look at Baker Mayfield, whether we like it or not, Baker Mayfield's probably going to get a 1-year deal for anywhere from 10 to 15 million to be a team's bridge starting quarterback for a long time, because at least, when you think about being able to keep the thing on the tracks, it's not good, it's not pretty, it's not what you're going to win a Super Bowl with. But right now in the NFL, when you have so many, I mean, we're going to talk to Mike Mayock in a little bit here, but you look at back in Vegas, 3-0 game, that's two backup quarterbacks dueling it out indoors to a 3-0 game. That's just it's incredibly hard to stomach. And so a lot of teams are going to prefer the Derek Carrs and the Baker Mayfields and even the Desmond Ridders, even though to our eyes, they seem like dead ends, right? Baker Mayfield feels like a dead end as a quarterback option in the NFL, even though week to week he makes some plays that impress us at times.
Impress us, but then in the end, are they really pulling it off? And what's going to be interesting for this division, then we can move on to your next game, I know. And thank you for bringing it up. I know you're not always.
I watch every Falcons game because I know for one, our models like the Saints and Bucks. So I always look at the Falcons to see if they're actually going to win that division because I can't believe it with my eyes. So I got to make sure, I got to watch along, but those three teams at 6 and 7, I feel bad. I'm I tweeted out the odds that FanDuel had to win that division. And I subtweeted, I said, imagine looking at this and being Matt Ryan, right? Where you're in years of you're one of the best quarterbacks in the whole league. And obviously you as well, being the person who had the best drafts collectively from 2008 to 2020. Imagine looking at that division, you're looking at Drew Brees and all those great players. You're looking at Cam Newton and all those great players. And then, even Jameis had his moments, of course, in 2016 that they had a winning record. And you had to fight and claw just to get a wild card in that division. And now, if you put one foot in front of the other, I think that your old Falcons teams probably would have won that division by 5 games. And it's sort of weird to see.
Let me ask you this before we move on. Which one in this division, okay, NFC South, has the best odds of landing Bill Belichick? That's a tough one. I only asked that.
I actually don't think it's that hard. I think it's Carolina.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, let's talk economics of the NFL for a second, right? So everybody's looking at Washington. I think understandably, Josh Harris is, trying to, after years and years of the Dan Snyder stuff and trying to project confidence. There's also that cool little quirk that Vince Lombardi coached in Washington for a year after his time with Green Bay. So there's sort of this idea of hey, kind of follow the same path. But Washington, the Josh Harris, I don't think has as many resources as David Tepper does. And so if you're thinking about, where are these Hall of Fame caliber coaches going? Sean Payton went to Denver because the Waltons have that kind of money. Right. And that's cash that doesn't have to go against the cap. So the teams that want to pay up can really pay up. Well, I think Carolina has the money to do it.
I think Carolina does, but I think there are other teams in this division who are ripe potentially for a Hall of Fame and a Super Bowl winning coach. And I do believe, I've said this many times, I believe Bill can bring a Super Bowl to a team within 3 years. And I do also believe, let's just we'll stay on your team right now, Carolina. There's a guy out there from another team that might come available, and sometimes he's been there a long time. If Mike Tomlin comes available with David Tepper's connections to Pittsburgh,
good call.
He has a great respect for him.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Mike just needs a change. I don't say that I like Mike a lot. I think he's a damn good coach, and I think he can also has the ability to win a Super Bowl. Where they are, I'm just saying it's going to be an interesting division to see if there's going to be movement with this division with some potentially, and I'm saying with Bill, I have no idea whether he's coming out. I'm not speaking to that. I'm just saying if they ever do come out, there's going to be some coaches out there that teams are going to they're going to snap up, and they're going to say, I like the idea of this young guy that I don't even know if talks a whole bunch, the Ben Johnson of the world, and maybe I bring in someone who is a proven winner. That could be the case.
Well, and the honest to God's truth, and I like Ben Johnson, and we did a lot. We do a ton of modeling on head coaching, but like the sneaky secret is Detroit. The offensive coordinating for last year's Lions was the numbers look better last year. I'll just say that. So like I think Goff has regressed a little bit this year. I think that they've been healthier, even though the offense hasn't been quite as efficient. Yesterday now. Props to Matt Eberflus, right? They got that Bears team doing a really good job, but you got held to 13 points by a Bears defense that no one thinks is very good, and so I wonder about that one, and that's why a lot of people will say you take a lot of we look at a guy like Brandon Staley and we ask why did he take a job so fast? Why didn't he let his steak marinate a little bit longer? And I think we see the answer, right? Because you don't take that opportunity, you go back, and maybe your stock falls. I think about even like at the quarterback position, Matt Leinart. If Matt Leinart comes out his junior year of USC, he's a top 3 pick. Comes out his senior year, he's a top pick 10th, and like that's real stuff, right? And so that's interesting. I don't know if the Saints necessarily would go for Belichick. I think the Falcons. It depends upon how they finish, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to move on from, I don't think that they're anywhere. Like, I don't see them moving on from Arthur Smith quite yet. And so when you said Panthers, I actually thought of Sean McDermott, but of course they got, as a segue, a very crucial win yesterday in Kansas City. Thomas, this is the 4th consecutive game that the Sean McDermott Bills in the regular season have won in Arrowhead. Now, of course, they've lost 2 playoff games there. But they're 4-0 the last 4 regular season games there. 20-17. It was a game, obviously, that everybody's going to remember the Kadarius Toney offsides, the creativity from Travis Kelce. I'm a Chiefs fan, so I watch these games. At the end, I'm thinking to myself, like, everybody's going to focus on the Toney thing, but I look at the drop passes, I look at the penalties, I look at the missed tackles, and I don't think the Chiefs deserve to win that game. So I'm not all that upset about the penalty, the calls and stuff. This team doesn't leave itself any room for error. And so when they make errors, they're top 10 in terms of penalties, top 10 in terms of turnovers as far as differential. Like the Bills came in there and they were the better football team yesterday. Like that, to me, I think that, good work by McDermott. I know it's a rough week for him as far as that story that came out and everything. What was your takeaway from that game?
What I do want to know is, first of all, what was your take on Mahomes and his blow up at the end? And has that happened? Have you seen that, by the way?
No. So obviously it's a bad look. And I think going up to Josh Allen and talking, that's not a great look. I don't like that. Mahomes this season has deflected blame almost the entire time. Marquez Valdes-Scantling dropped the touchdown. He said, I got to throw that ball better. He's shouldered a lot of the load on this team. And I don't think he's playing as well as normal. Like, I don't think he's played as well as he did a season ago. So he's regressed a little some. I don't think Andy Reid yet has really pulled out all the stops. And so I think that they're kind of ironing stuff out. This team kind of reminds me of the 2018 Patriots, where like they lose, they're not quite there. They're Super Bowl caliber, but they're not kicking teams' ass. But I think like it all bubbled up, right? A year where you're dealing with kind of suboptimal receivers all the time. Your offense is not humming. Like if you would have told me, okay, Chiefs get the ball down 3 with 2 minutes left and 2 timeouts 2 years ago, I'm like, this game's over. Patrick is going to go and score a touch. And like now I have no faith that they can move the ball like that.
How difficult was it not having Pacheco? What did you think their run game was?
I thought Clyde Edwards-Helaire actually ran the ball. Like for him, and obviously he's a first-round pick, so you sort of expect that. But like, Edwards-Helaire, I guess it only was 3.5 a carry. They got 4.8 out of McKinnon and a touchdown. Tony gave him 16 on 2 carries, so it was not quite as good or as physical. But I don't think that was the problem. Penalties. The right tackle continues to give them penalties, and at wide receiver they have drops. And the other part, and like I said, Mahomes is my favorite player. He's the best player in the league, I think. So I'm not breaking any ground here. But like 1st and 10, right after the Rashee Rice catch, he one-hopped Rashee Rice to put that ball in field goal range. Like I just don't like. And maybe you could expect like this team is built so that if Mahomes is error free, they're going to win. And when he's not error free, like it's a coin flip. So I get worried again. Just they didn't run the ball quite as effectively as normal, but I think a lot of it was on the passing game, and that's why I think that he eventually bubbled up and said like this game was the defense for the Chiefs last night played a tremendous football. The defense put it on their play. They only gave up 20. And Mahomes is probably really irritated that they couldn't take advantage and beat one of their rivals.
I know I've mentioned this before. How many people out there worry that the distraction element is there? All the commercials. I'm not saying they're doing it now, right? That was a big discussion about it, whether it was with us or someone else. It was like, look, if they're doing commercials during the season, that's one thing. Off season doesn't matter. But off season does, can be a pull. When your focus is on a lot of stuff, every time I turn around, one of the big studs is doing a commercial, along with a head coach, right, who I have a great deal of respect for. It's just it's a different approach. You never obviously saw that with Bill Belichick and the Patriot group, right? And I don't think you've seen it with a lot of people. Like they kicked into gear, they have the personality to do it. How much does that play into this from your perspective? Because from mine, my head goes there, right? I would beat myself up over things like this, wondering how much is this really distracting? And can we push it aside? You're not going to push it aside because those commercials are coming all the way through, whether you're in the playoffs and or in the Super Bowl, right? It's going to be crazy how much is out there. How much, you also have Kelsey with his relationship situation. There's a lot there. That's not easy to deal with.
Well, and 2 years ago when they were really having their struggles, it was Patrick Mahomes' brother, and he was getting in trouble. And like you do wonder, right? Last season they did the quarterback documentary, and it seemed like they got everything in order. But so part of me is like, well, I don't know how much everybody's going through, so I can't really necessarily judge. But like it does seem, and it is also one of those things, Thomas, when everything's going well, you ignore everything.
Yep.
And when everything's not going well, you don't. So. We do have a special guest coming in, by the way, as we transition. We have Mike Mayock.
There he is.
Mike Mayock, welcome to the show. How many guests have we had, Thomas, with you on? We've had Mike, we had Jack Easterby, but welcome to the show, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing great. This is a pretty cool setup you guys have here.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thomas has a great vision. He's got way better taste than me, as you can tell by his outfit versus my outfit. He's just so much swaggier than I am, and as such, he came up with this. So, Mike, former general manager of the Raiders, was an analyst, in the draft from NFL Network, and I've followed your work for a long time. This is a great honor.
Honor's mine. Have you seen Thomas's socks today? You want to talk about?
I can't even get there. I'm in such awe of the rest of the getup. Really, we had a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, you talk swaggy. Look at the glasses.
No, yeah. I honest to God, it's funny you said about the socks. I got up this morning. I saw green socks, red socks. I don't know, and I'm like, this was my only pair of blue, and it had stripes all up and down it, which has kind of gone by the wayside now. People aren't having as fancy socks. But we're not here to talk about socks or glasses. We are here to tap in to my guy here. Like this guy, we'll get into it in a minute here, but just so everyone knows, Mike Mayock what we're doing at Sumer Sports right now, and Mike Mayock's involvement is something that we are extremely proud of. And Mike's interaction with us from obviously a very, very intelligent and insightful football perspective, also moving along with us, talking a lot about data and the direction of data, which is not easy for some of us who consider ourselves as old school, right?
Yep, 100%.
But we we're all learning and growing from guys like you, Eric. We can listen to guys like you and be really edified. But let's talk a little bit of Philadelphia Eagles, that game. But I would love to circle back on this before we cut off here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, let's talk first about what we're doing here, right? So we have at Sumer Sports, we have our own scouting department, which is different. Like, obviously, I have roots at PFF where we have data analysts kind of collecting data and producing a grade. This is a little bit different and much different. This is sort of exactly what NFL teams do. This is exactly what different services like Blesto and others do, where you guys are watching film and you're putting a grade on a player. You're adding that context that is difficult for pure data analysts to arrive at. And what I think about when I think about this richness of data is like from like a obviously a forward-facing like sort of gaming perspective. There's just so much there to be gleaned from it. But obviously for for teams who are trying to look for a second opinion on a player, I think that this is incredibly valuable stuff. And obviously, selfishly for me, just being able to interact with you and see what you guys see, even from the view that I have, it's so incredibly valuable. And to get you guys, I think when you guys are talking to each other about players, there's just so much I can pick up on.
What's kind of cool though, Eric, and you touched on it on one side of it. The flip side is being around you and the data guys opens up doors that Thomas and I maybe hadn't looked at before. And the way I look at Sumer is that it's kind of the proper marriage between respecting football, okay, so that we are putting grades, human beings judging human beings. And it's hard to get away from that piece of it. Yet we're also taking something driven by analytics and forcing us all to open our minds a little bit to try and get to the best answer. Not a answer, the best answer. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. There's so much. Yeah, I even think about, like, for example, on our website at sumersports.com, we have, statistics for every single player. And the leader right now in the clubhouse for what's called expected points in the passing game is Brock Purdy, right? And I think that analytics, right, from my perspective, it's really hard to untangle what Brock Purdy is doing from what Kyle Shanahan is doing. And so, I think if somebody has a naive view, they're going to say, well, Brock Purdy is the best quarterback in the NFL. And, from you guys' perspective, you're able to go in and look at the traits and you're able to look at what has had, success, front to back in the NFL. Like when they do this, this sort of set of traits can transcend scheme. It can transcend surrounding talent. It can transcend all of the stuff that when you just look at the statistics, those are contextual pieces that maybe get lumped in too much. Or if you try to do too much, like if I just dismiss every quarterback that's ever played with Kyle Shanahan, I'm going to miss out on, Thomas's guy, Matt Ryan, who was pretty good no matter what scheme he was in. And he was just a little bit better with Kyle. And so there's a lot to do to your point of like, but at the same time, there are obviously gonna be players, I think about like Elvis Dumervil. I think about guys in the past who like London Fletcher, now Ivan Pace for the Vikings. If people watch like a 5'10" linebacker whose statistics in college were amazing, but he doesn't necessarily have the same traits that some of the other guys who have played linebacker at a high level in the NFL have done. And so to your point, Mike, it's just this perfect marriage of the two systems where you can sort of take the average of the two and say like, look, traditional scouts are really good at evaluating, for example, safeties. Analytics have been notoriously awful at it. Okay, so let's see if we can bridge the gap here versus, a position like, I would even say like edge. Analytics is fairly good at coming up with who's going to be a good edge player. Is he big, fast, or strong? Is he productive in college? Okay, he's probably going to be a pretty good NFL player. And so we can sort of like weigh different things different ways. And again, having you guys' knowledge, having our knowledge on the analytics side, I think is a fierce combo.
You mentioned a name, Brock Purdy. People are people are on all sides of that fence with what he is or he isn't because of Shanahan and that whole coaching tree. And I think it's a great conversation because one of the hardest things, you mentioned safeties. I was an NFL safety, not a very good one, but I played safety in the NFL. I find it hard to really do a great job on safeties because the first thing you have to do is define what you are going to ask from them for a particular team, for a particular scheme. What are you looking for? It's easier to kind of find free safeties, center fielders. But what this 6'3" guy, Duggar, 222 pounds.
Played Division II.
Played Division II. What was he? Lenore
Ryan, yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, this is a big, good-looking, tough son of a gun. Where does he fit? You got to get the right fit. Brock Purdy started 1,000 games in college, was highly accurate, and if you put his tape on, the common denominator is his anticipation and his accuracy.
Yep.
That is so hard to find on tape sometimes with some of these big, strong-arm guys, yet in college football today, I mean, I can't tell you how many tapes I've done to get ready for our draft meetings where 90% of the throws are within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, how do you got to look through hours and hours of tape to find one anticipation throw.
Yes.
And then how do you grade that? How do you impute that? And so anyway, that's a long way of saying.
Well, I mean, you bring up such a good point. Like we had this issue when I was at PFF with Mekhi Becton because I created this thing called true pass blocking sets, which is basically, dropbacks longer than 2.5 seconds, no screens, no play actions, literally are you, and Thomas sees me in the office goofing around, but are you literally kick stepping to a depth, right? And actually pass protecting.
Right.
And, Becton had all these great traits, but when you actually took his Louisville tape, it was 100 snaps, right? You look at Trey Lance out of North Dakota State, for one, you have to numerically evaluate the talent for and against, in that realm. But also Trey Lance at North Dakota State had maybe 20 to 50 dropbacks when trailing. So when the other team knows you have to throw, how many times are you actually getting an eval on this player? And so then, so the information, we think about data, big data, we think about all these snaps the player gets, but a lot of times the decision makers like you guys are making these choices based upon a small amount of information that's been gathered. And these are, you don't want to ignore them, obviously, like Steve McNair, for example, Hall of Fame kind of caliber player at Alcorn State. So you're pretty glad Houston didn't, pass up on him. But for a lot of other players, I think the Niners probably would have wished they would have taken a quarterback who had maybe a little bit more information added to him.
As you're talking, I'm trying to think the tape I've watched this year. There's a high-level quarterback. One of the games I did, 31 of his 33 throws were within 8 yards of the line of scrimmage. 30, and the other two were over 21 yards, and he was over 2. And he had nothing between 11 and 20. Nothing where he had to drive a ball outside the numbers or anticipate in behind a linebacker. And you sit there and you go, okay, he's a good athlete, and that was fun to watch, but where am I?
Yes.
I got to find some more throws to justify whether or not I think at a certain level he'll ever anticipate or be able to drive a ball like that.
And that's a great point as we really start digging into personnel. Was that Bo Nix? Is that who you were talking about?
Yeah, we have our listeners, Mike, who are trying to guess who you were talking about, and so I posted a couple of them.
He doesn't want to talk about it yet.
Yeah, of course. So that's fine. Yeah, I mean, to your point, Justin Herbert's tape was like that, right? When you actually went and looked at the last few games of the last few seasons of Oregon, I can't remember what percentage, but it was a significant number that were underneath. But then, of course, you ask the question, is that a bad coaching job on their part where you have this robo quarterback who can hit all these doubles?
We could do this for 5 hours now.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, I remember meeting with Justin Herbert, and my whole conversation was driving towards Justin. You got this huge arm, you can fit it anywhere, and no disconnect, no disrespect towards their offense. They're a run-first team. Okay, yeah. They have an attitude of running the freaking football. I just did all of Bo Nix's tape and all of both those Washington Oregon games. Oregon wants to run the football. They want to throw the ball laterally, horizontally, right? So how do you evaluate that kid? So Justin Herbert, I'm sitting here I had 50 snaps ready to go for him, and we're going to sit down.
Yeah.
I had 50 pass plays laid out, and it was almost all where I thought he was too conservative, where he wouldn't rip it with that. So it was kind of like a stutter go on one side, okay, with a seam on the other versus single high. So all he had to do was kind of move the safety toward the stutter go and come back. And his job, now the wide receiver's job is to beat the corner to the inside leverage. His job is to fit it between the corner and the safety. So he's got to beat the safety. And I'm looking at, I got the tape and I'm like, tell me what you're thinking.
Yes.
You looked right at it and you checked it down. Why? And those things are what make, to me, scouting so fascinating, yet also so human-based at times that I actually welcome some of the data that supports some of the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the data can really help, Tom. I want to expound on this a little bit, but like the data can really help you ask the questions, right? Like, because I'm a fan of all football. Like I watch every game of but you can get these biases, right? You can develop them. You're like, oh my, you see one guy rip a post pattern. You're like, this guy is a daring quarterback. And then you look at the data, and to your point, like, it's like, well, why are 70% of his passes within -5 to 10 yards downfield? Like, and so you go to ask that question, and then, this gets to a lot of
scheme. You can't kill a kid to do what his coach is asking him to do.
Yeah, exactly. So then you look at other players who play in that scheme, and if they're doing the same thing, then and that's why like a lot of metrics are what are called above expectation. So basically, you take mathematically, you look at down distance, you look at scheme type, you look at all protection type, you look at all those, and then you say what percentage of passes are more than 10 yards in this offense, and maybe his number's low, but his number's higher than other players who play those same. And so you can kind of tease that out. But even then, there's so much movement now in college football, coaches and all this stuff, where you really have to do your digging to make sure that you're asking the right questions, because to your point, a lot of these players are just doing what they're asked. And especially at the college level where, with NIL, it's maybe going to be a little different down the stretch. But in the NFL, some guys have a little bit more autonomy because they're the ones making all the money, versus in college, you're just trying to make sure that your coach tells the Thomas Dimitroffs and the Mike Mayock's of the world, like, hey, this is a good kid. He'll follow directions. He's not going to go off the script and stuff. And so there's less autonomy than I think people believe.
Drake May is a guy this year that I find intriguing for several of the same reasons that I did with Justin Herbert. And I think he's ultra conservative. I think they throw a lot laterally in that. And then at other times, I can pull clips out and see him drive the ball down the field. It's really fun. Who was it against? North Carolina State, I want to say. They got behind, and he was forced to have to rip the ball in the second half. That's the kind of tape you got to go find, right? They're down 14 or 17. He can't just rely on his legs, which is what he wants to do, right? So now he's forcing and anticipating and throwing and trying to throw back shoulders, throw guys open. That's what I want to see, because there are some guys in the draft that do it naturally. Go look at the USC kid and watch him run around. Watch Michael Penix. There are different guys that you can see plenty of that tape. But Eric, to your point, when you don't have as big a subset quantity of comparatives, it's really hard as a scout to bang the table and say, yeah, I know he can make that throw and he can do it in the NFL on a consistent basis.
Let's talk two quarterbacks in a game, Dallas, Philly. We need to get, this is a
because I really like this discussion vis-a-vis these two guys, right? Because Jalen Hurts coming out, right? When you look at just raw numbers, his 1 year with Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma, you're talking about a guy, great completion percentage, great yards per attempt, all this kind of stuff. But there was always questions about processing. Like, Mike, we do this cool thing at Sumer, which we take scouting reports and the words that go into them. So all the great work that you guys do. And we compare the words literally between the players. And so you have, like with a guy like Jalen Hurts, you have maybe somebody might not slap a great grade on him, but they might say things about him in the notes that are similar to other great players. So, for example, with Hurts, and I know this isn't necessarily apropos anymore, but at the time, they were comparing him to Deshaun Watson, the leadership kind of capabilities at Clemson, winning the title and going into Houston and having leads in the playoffs and all this stuff. And like that's kind of been what I've seen. Like, in this case, the scouting report kind of rings true. Not great in terms of like anticipation, I don't think, but has the athleticism and the leadership capabilities where he can carry this team to a 10-3 mark. And what I think is really cool, guys, is when I watch Dak Prescott now with the Cowboys, I see him taking a little bit more leadership. I think Mike McCarthy takes over that play calling role from Kellen Moore, and he's put some of that responsibility on the shoulders of Prescott. And I think over the past 2 months, what you've really seen is a quarterback kind of coming of age.
So we're talking, interestingly enough, we're talking about a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick, right? Dak was in the 4th and Jalen was a 2. What impressed me about Jalen in the process, we interviewed him at the Combine, and it was less about the tape and more about the kid. The kid was one of the most genuine young men. It's hard to get an impression with the amount of time you're given, so I wanted to spend some more time with him. One of the most genuine kids. How he handled the demotion at Alabama to Tua with class, dignity, professionalism. You could see him being the face of a franchise. Okay, so kind of on the soft side of it, away from the data-driven stuff, you're really impressed with the kid and what kind of leader you think he can become. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, okay, what kind of scheme did he come out of? When you talk about anticipation and driving the ball, a lot of RPOs. Right? A lot of either this or that kind of decisions, which don't lend itself as much towards the quote traditional West Coast or whatever you want to go towards. But what has developed with the Eagles, and I live in Philly and I've seen them practice a lot and I know their people pretty well, is they build a system around him, which is what good coaches do, right? What does he do well? This year, what I found intriguing was I was at training camp several times, and I'm thinking to myself, the first thing defenses are going to do after his success last year is they're going to take away the planned quarterback run. Okay, that was kind of their wild card last year that made them special. They had the RPO game, they had great wideouts, they had a good running attack, but on top of all that, you had to account for the quarterback as an extra gap in your run scheme. Okay, so what happened the first 3 or 4 games of the year, I think it was New England week 1. New England defense played really good against them, and they struggled, and they took away his run game, the planned quarterback run. And then the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, people are going, what's wrong with Jalen Hurts? And I'm like, well, they've taken away a big part of what the Eagles do. They got a new coordinator on defense. They've got some different pieces. They got to figure some things out. And then he gets hurt, and he continues to play, right? So to me, there's still – on offense, every team's taking the planned quarterback run away to an extent. He's beat up with the knee. You could see him with Dallas last night. I mean, they're running that Kelsey out in front of him behind, and he's just sliding whenever he could. Pick up 6 or 7. So those 17s and 18s are now 6s and 7s, okay? And teams have a much better idea what to do to slow them down a little bit, and I do believe he's hurt. A lot of people are questioning whether or not he can process and get to 2-3, but that offense isn't really set up to do all of that. Dak Prescott, to your point, I apologize for this long answer.
No, this is great info. This is stuff that, of course, Thomas and I have hinted at a lot of the show, but it's obviously great to get confirmation on a lot of this.
But Dak Prescott, to your point, Eric, which I think is a great one, is Mike McCarthy takes over, gives him even more ownership of that offense, and they have a shared vision, a common vision. They struggled early in the year, right? They had 2 or 3 bad games in a row. They got spanked by San Francisco. Philly beat – that Philly tape, by the way, is the first one. The first tape, I watched every snap, both sides of the ball. That was a hell of a tape to watch. And the right tackle from Dallas got beat up a little bit. He struggled. Steele. That caused Dak some problems with getting the ball out. 88's a bad dude. That tight end is a developing tight end. Ferguson. Yep. I think he's Barry Alvarez's.
There's nothing better than a tight end that's willing to run up the seam and get cracked, right? Like that guy is fearless, and Dak will throw the seam better than any quarterback in the league, I think.
Yeah, and then you got a run game, you got an O-line. Those 2 teams are similar on offense in that the quarterbacks are really running the show, but they can run the ball. They have devastating wideouts. And when healthy, the Eagles got Goddard back last night. Dallas has Ferguson. So I think offensively, you can throw those two teams up against the wall and say, yeah, schematically they're a little different, but they're built in a similar fashion. Dominant offensive line, really good skill guys, and a quarterback that is a great leader that was not a first-round pick with physical traits. Kind of intriguing, right?
Well, and I think especially in this NFL where Thomas and I have had this discussion for a long time now that, Matt Ryan's retired, Drew Brees is retired, Phillip Rivers is retired, Ben Roethlisberger, Brady, as you start to see these, and it's not one for one. It's not Herbert comes in and Brady leaves. There's fewer great guys that are coming into the league than are leaving. It's intriguing. Yes, Mike, can you win a Super Bowl now without one of those truly elite guys? And especially, since 2012, the only Super Bowl that did not include a quarterback making a team built around a quarterback making rookie contract money was when Thomas's Falcons and Thomas's old team, the Patriots, made the Super Bowl in 2016. Every other Super Bowl has included at least one quarterback for whom a team built around a rookie deal. Yeah. That's not probably going to happen as much anymore because you can have some of these guys who aren't like on you guys' scale, the nines, right, playing quarterback, but are still making 9-ish money. Like you can still do it as long as the coaching staff and this team is willing to marry those things well. And you're seeing that with Hurts and you're seeing with Dak. Those guys are both making good money now, but you're still able to be a Super Bowl contender because, to your point, they build the entire airplane around them. And I want to sort of get to this because both of you guys were team builders in the NFL. There is so much value in what the Eagles have, which is continuity, right? And a shared vision, how we can build a team around a quarterback who's not perfect because he knows that if he swings and misses on a Jalen Reagor or he doesn't hit on, Andre Dillard, he's not losing his job, right? Like there's an element of being able to experiment and, apply the analytics when it's unconventional, all those things when you have that kind of long-term stability. And I think that being able to win with a quarterback who's not Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Justin Herbert, I think that's one of the ways in which you can is when you have institutional stability and you're able to sort of build a roster around a unique skill set that's not perfect, but good enough.
Keep in mind Howie's the same guy that traded up twice to get Carson Wentz. Okay, and because he saw the classic institutional first-round guy, and he was rookie of the year until he blew out his knee that year. I mean, he was playing at a high level. So I think Howie Roseman's special. He's different. I know Howie really well. And to your point, Eric, I still think in today's day, I think there's probably, we can argue about who the franchise quarterbacks are, but there's a handful. There's 5, 6, 7, whatever max. That second group is the one that intrigues me the most. Okay, like call it 7 to 12 or whatever that second group is. To your point, that's the group that if you can build around properly, you can win championships. Okay, but it's really hard because your margin of error goes like this because Patrick Mahomes isn't there to bail you out in the last minute. Yep. Okay, so the margin of error goes down. That's why the Justin Herberts of the world have to become the next guy. They have to become.
Well, and that's why guys like, when you guys are building teams, right? That's why when Thomas picks at 3 and takes Matt, like you're not taking, and I'm more sympathetic to the Trey Lance pick than a lot of people, even though it didn't work. That's why you don't take Mac Jones at 3, to your point, like that, the rumored pick, because we've all seen that Mac Jones has significant limitations. So when those perturbations hit the team, right, it's not. Whereas, Trey Lance was a bust, but like everybody saw Patrick Mahomes there, right? And everybody saw kind of that potential, and that's what you're buying into.
I'll tell you this though.
Not everybody, of course, but some be. Some.
The Mahomes thing's really interesting. I'll be really honest with you, and you can look this up. When I was doing stuff for NFL Network and had a list of top 100 and all that kind of stuff, I went on the air and basically said, "Look, I watched every throw Patrick Mahomes made at Texas Tech, every one of them." And I came out of it and I said on the air, he's either going to be a Hall of Fame player or he's going to be out of the NFL in 3 or 4 years. And I don't know. And I can't tell you which way it's going. I think I put him at like player number 30 on my top 100 because I just didn't. He made so many bad decisions at Texas Tech. I can't even begin to tell you some of the throws he had. And the reason he did was he was not on a good football team like Matt Ryan at Boston College, and he was trying to throw guys open, trying to win football games, right? And now Patrick Mahomes they're building statues already.
Think about Brett Favre. Brett Favre was a backup behind Chris Miller and Billy Joe Tolliver.
Yes.
Then he goes and then he obviously gets out of Atlanta, and everybody, Chris Miller made the Pro Bowl Favre's rookie year. So they should.
The fit is critical. The fit is critical.
Yeah, and Mike Holmgren should be in the Hall of Fame. He of course developed him and fought with him, and everybody remembers the 1994 game where they were going to put Mark Brunell in, and then he decided against it. Like the whole, a lot of these things, we live in a threshold world, like we live in a threshold where like the difference between, to your point, Hall of Fame and out of the league is not that big, right? And that's obviously, humbles us as evaluators, you from the scouting side, myself from the analytics side. But it is literally that tenuous, and that's why a lot of this stuff is you really have to pin down what you're looking for and what you're building.
The best thing that ever happened to Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, it was Andy Reid. Well, Andy Reid, of course, was in the building with Brett Favre and kind of knows how to to build a structure around a player.
To your point, though, and I apologize for jumping in. I'm getting excited here. To your point, like he ends up with Andy. Andy trades from 31 to 10 or whatever those numbers were back then. If he ends up at the wrong place, are we talking about Patrick Mahomes today the same way we are if he ends up? Justin Herbert right now. I feel, and I'm not taking any shots anywhere because I'm not in the building. I'm just saying that's a talented kid.
It's a talented kid.
And you feel badly for him, and he needs to become a dude.
Completely agree with you on Herbert. Yeah. So let me ask you this before we leave, because I know we're getting closer to 50. Mike, so you and I were talking a little bit earlier. We don't go in a ton of depth of this. 'Tis the season. We're getting closer to all the discussions about coaching changes, GM changes. There's a lot of that without getting into detail about that. Eric and I have talked ad nauseum about this. Probably people are getting sick and tired of hearing me say it, but there's a lot of nuance to it, right? How it happens, what's going to happen, who's going to be set up, who's going to be staying with the team, ownership, dealing with ownership. Again, without getting specifics, do you think there are going to be 5 to 7 complete organizational changes in this league?
My message would be this, and there is every year, it seems like, right? But my message is really this, is that from an ownership perspective, these guys need to understand how critical continuity is in any industry. And if you look at, I always like to use the example of the AFC North, and you look at Pittsburgh and you look at Baltimore. Okay, 2 teams that have minimal turnover amongst their GM and head coach. And even when things aren't as good as they want, the owners stick in there. And by comparison, if you look at the other 2 teams in that division, they've struggled until recently. And why? Because finally they've stuck with people. Okay, they're making decisions. Kevin Stefanski's doing a great job. Barry's doing a great job. Cincinnati has pulled, Joe Burrow's a big piece, but still, Cincinnati's doing a great job. And to me, it comes down to you can't change your head coach and GM every other year. And now you're changing scheme. Now you're changing everything. You're
changing data, like how you tag everything, how you scout players, what you're like. The big thing, like let's go underneath the hood a little bit here. The hardest part of our job at Sumer is like we just started 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And so some of our data is only a certain number of years long. And so we don't necessarily know when Mike Mayock slaps an 8.7 on a guy, like we don't necessarily know until you've slapped 8.7 on about 10 to 15 players, what that really means. And so again, like you come in, I think about Kwesi, Adolfo Mensa in Minnesota, he shows up, wants to be the analytics GM, but you got 3 months to build a draft model.
Yeah, right.
Good luck. Right now, you're going to be drafting based upon the guy who was just fired, his grades, right? And like, to your point, like we oftentimes do not appreciate how long. And you get 7 picks a draft on it, like on average 10 at the very highest if you're looking at averages. So does anybody actually know if these guys are like? Kwesi had one draft where literally none of the players hit, and now he's in another draft where literally all the players are pretty good. And so, like, what is he? Is he good or is he bad? And you throw your hands up, you say you don't know. And that's true about a lot of these guys that get fired.
And I think what's important for me to ask Mike, and I'll be interested to get your take, can be big picture. I have a strong feeling if I were to sit down respectfully with an ownership group of 32 owners or whatever it is, I would say the responsible thing is to make sure that you are going into your search committee on your next selection of your head coach and or GM, and to not just have a couple randos within your building helping you on it, right? The search group is vital. I'm not saying many of them have randos. I'm saying there can be ulterior motives within that building of who wants to be a part of bringing someone else in. I have a strong feeling, Eric, and I've told you this before, some owners are being guided by presidents, and some of the presidents are great. Some of the presidents aren't involved. Some of the presidents are. But some are saying, well, I don't really want this really, really strong GM and really strong head coach because my presence in the building is going to be minimized, right, as a president. So are they guiding the owner in a different way? I'm not just saying that that's always the way, but I'm saying an owner, respectfully, his responsibility is to look at who his group is and who's looking for what and are there ulterior motives to have a certain person come in. If the person is coming in, he's going to be the best choice to win games and ultimately a Super Bowl, that's vital, which comes back to Bill Belichick. I think Bill Belichick can win a Super Bowl in the next 3 years for the next team if, respectfully, he does leave there and goes somewhere else. But you have to be an owner that understands and a president that understands he is coming in as these are. Yeah. He's not coming in at anything but that. So I guess my point is, I think it's all part of everyone growing and learning again. And I think it's really, really important to make sure that the owners are looking at their growing group and who's going to help them pick their coach and their GM and look at it closely and not just whimsically look at it.
Football is not the core business for most owners. Okay.
Sure.
So we're at a point now, and I've had this conversation with a bunch of people, and it has to start with the owners. And whether it's a search committee or whatever it is, and you've got to define your parameters, what you're looking for. And every team's a little different. But I'm getting tired of who's the next Sean McVay. Like, that's what happens. There's this herd philosophy in the NFL. Like, oh, we have to find the young offensive genius. Okay. And what drives me crazy is what we lose in the translation is what it really does come down to, first and foremost, is who's the best leader of men. Okay. I can go buy scheme. I can hire an offensive coordinator who's young and innovative and fits what my quarterback is going to do or my vision of a quarterback. But you bet if you don't have the right guy at the top, then none of the rest of it matters. So we're chasing so hard to find the young offensive minds that I think we're losing track of a lot of really valuable guys who get the job done immediately.
Are we chasing also to fill in the young general manager? Because that is another topic of discussion. I think there's a great mix in this league, right? Mix of young and mix of veteran experience. And I think it depends on the organization, right? There may be, Mr. Tepper may be looking for something as youth, or he may be looking at something else. If something happens, he's got to make a decision on that, right?
Yeah, but you don't want to be making that decision every year.
No, you don't.
Which is what they're doing.
That's right.
Well, and to your point, Mike, I think you made a tremendous point, and there's a good comment here. Does Dallas weirdly have a potential edge with Jerry Jones basically running the thing as a family? I think that is, we've seen in Carolina, for example, a person who has, a very tried and true business acumen trying to run a team like that, having fits and starts. There's also, football, to your point, is a game of people and having the people skills and everything like that, especially, and this is what gets tricky, when the profit motives in the NFL are not tied to winning, right? Like it's unlike any other. Snyder just sold the Commanders, like made a fortune off of them. And that wasn't a team that necessarily had any success when he was there. And so there's this weird thing where, it really does take a combination of people who have outside ideas because you want to innovate, but you also have to understand the game of football so that you understand how these components work together and how players react to certain changes. And even we at Sumer have this, like if we ever do a reorg or something like that, there's always these personal things, there's human things that are not necessarily appreciated by people who come from the outside and are not necessarily used to dealing in football. And I know that comes off as a little like fuddy-duddy or whatever, but I do think that like there is an element of the footballness to all this that is important to actually have put into the cake.
Eric, and the last thing I'll say, and then I can turn it over to you and we can finish off. Again, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. The ownership, there are some great owners in this league. There are other owners that are learning along the way, right? And I think it's imperative, back to selection group that they're working with, that's important how they're going to put that together. It's also important that they look and understand there are other waves of selection process people out there, right? We've seen some great men, Bill Polian, Ernie Accorsi, Ron Wolf. Those people have been vital in helping a lot of teams along the way. There are also some other search people out there who do a great job, who have a fantastic background, who can also fold in and be really good for these owners and helping them get to the next spot that they need to get to. Because, I mean, look, there are some outrageously intelligent owners, but to Mike's point earlier, their background isn't in football, right? So hopefully they can utilize all their great intelligence and fold in the right football people to help them build the right organization for Super Bowl purposes.
Yeah, organizations start, number one, with the owner. And in the NFL, that's often a wild card. Number two, there's a relationship between the head coach and the GM. If the head coach and the GM are not tied at the hip philosophically, you got no chance. It's hard enough to win when you are tied together, let alone when you're not. And then lastly, it's the quarterback. Going back to Eric's comment, I mean, there's still 5 or 6 guys that can help you get to a Super Bowl better than anybody else, and they're quarterbacks. So, if you're not hitting on all 3 of those cylinders, then your chances of making it playing in February are very minimal.
It's why I say all the time. I mean, Brett Veach is a good young general manager. And he argues with me. Awesome. I'm not young anymore. I'm like, no, you're not. You are so talented in what you've done. And he has a trifecta. He's got one of the very best owners in Clark Hunt, one of the very best head coaches in Andy, and one of the very best quarterbacks.
Yeah, I always say the quarterback is management. Like whether he wants to be or not, he's part of management.
Right.
And there are some guys who take that on, and there are some guys that don't. And like to your point, Thomas, when you were in Atlanta, like Matt Ryan was the face of the franchise. He did a lot of stuff, to make sure that was true, and you guys won a lot as a result.
Definitely,
100%.
This has been a tremendous conversation. We want to thank everybody who's been in the chat, everybody who's listened on Twitter. I think, Thomas, we're going to set records. We got to send Mike another bonus for that, probably. In all honesty,
a glass of red wine tonight.
Yeah, I'm getting a glass.
That's right. That's going to be the bonus here. But we all want to thank you all for coming. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, tell your friends about the show, and we'll see you on Wednesday. So for Mike Mayock, for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been the Sumer Sports Show.